Many people confuse the concepts of visa and status in Canada. That's why I decided to prepare this presentation, and hopefully it will help you to understand these concepts. And when you're applying for extension of your status or applying for a visa, you understand what you are actually doing. Just to let you know, this is an educational presentation, so please read this disclaimer. You can pause it and read it. There is no intention here to offer immigration advice. There are three types of status in Canada: permanent status, temporary status, and no status at all. And by status, of course, I'm referring to legal status in Canada based on the immigration law. A permanent status in Canada covers three groups. One group are the Indigenous people in Canada. Specifically, the registered Indians are recognized to have permanent status in Canada under the Indian Act. We also have Canadian citizens, those people who have become citizens either by birth or through naturalization process. And the last group is permanent residents of Canada. Obviously, as a permanent resident of Canada, you remain a permanent resident as long as you hold your permanent resident status. However, if you lose your permanent resident status, for example, for inadmissibility issues or not meeting the residency obligations, then you do not have permanent status in Canada anymore. Some people, they have legal temporary status in Canada. And those people could be any of these groups that I've mentioned here. Implicit visitor record is something that happens at the port of entry. So somebody as a visitor approaches the port of entry and the officer stamps their passport, and sometimes they don't even stamp their passport. And that person can remain in Canada for a specific period of time, by default for up to 6 months, unless the officer clearly mentions on the passport the expiry of their visitor status in Canada. But sometimes you receive an explicit visitor record, and this simply means that at the port of entry or while you are inside Canada, an immigration officer or a border services officer issues a piece of paper that reads visitor record and clearly tells you for how long you can be a visitor in Canada. Whether you have received implicit visitor record or an explicit visitor record, as long as your visitor record is valid, you have valid temporary status in Canada. Some people are inadmissible to Canada. Despite being inadmissible, they receive temporary resident permits, and those permits allow them to remain in Canada for a few days or sometimes for several months. These people also have legal temporary status in Canada. Majority of workers in Canada, they have legal temporary status in Canada. However, if on the bottom of the work permit clearly says does not confer temporary status in Canada or something similar to that, it means that the worker does not have the temporary status in Canada despite having the permission to remain and work in Canada. Another example are refugee claimants who hold work permits. Despite holding a work permit, they do not hold a temporary status in Canada. Also keep in mind that you have temporary status in Canada only if you are working during the time frame that work permit defines for you. In other words, beyond your work permit expiry date, unless you have a maintained status, you do not have status. If a worker receives an enforceable removal order, they also lose their work permit or temporary status in Canada. Study permit is almost the same as work permit. If you hold a valid study permit, then you most likely have status in Canada unless you are under an enforceable removal order from Canada, or you have finished your studies and it's been more than 90 days since finishing your studies, or the expiry date of your study permit has reached. Whichever of these happens first, then you do not have legal temporary status in Canada unless you have maintained status in Canada or you're changed your status to another kind of status. Protected persons are usually people who file for refugee in Canada, and Refugee Protection Division or Refugee Appeal Division of the Immigration Refugee Board of Canada allows them to become protected people and receive protection from the government of Canada. These people have temporary status in Canada. And I have not mentioned maintained status here, but generally speaking, if you are inside Canada and before the expiry of your status, you apply for an extension of your status, then you will have a maintained status, which means that your previous status remains valid until you receive your new status or a decision by the immigration officer. To clarify matters, let's also look at the question that who does not have legal status in Canada. And here I have some examples. One example would be most of the people who enter Canada irregularly. And by irregular entry, I'm referring to those situations that the person does not appear at the port of entry and an officer does not examine them, but instead they try to cross the border between the United States and Canada from a land crossing, or somehow they reach Canada via sea and they enter Canada without being examined. Almost all of those people do not have legal status in Canada. Refugee claimants are those people that enter Canada with or without a valid visa, but they file for refugee status either at the port of entry or inside Canada. Refugee claimants do not have legal status in Canada. However, if they become protected people, then they suddenly will have legal status in Canada. If you have a status in Canada, but you remain in Canada beyond the validity of your status, then you don't have legal status in Canada unless before the expiry of your status you applied for extension of your status, and that's how you have maintained the status. If somebody receives a removal order, including a departure order, an exclusion order, or a deportation order, and that removal order is enforceable, it means that CBSA can remove you from Canada, then you do not have valid status in Canada anymore. And also some people are stateless. It means that they are not citizens of any country. Many of those people, if they are inside Canada, they do not have legal status in Canada unless they have applied for something. For example, they have received protection from Canada. Now that we discussed the concept of status, let's talk about temporary resident visa or TRV. A TRV on its own does not mean that you have a legal status in Canada. A TRV serves two purposes. One of them is the ability to travel to Canada. If you have a valid TRV, then if you are boarding an airplane, the airplane will allow you to enter the airplane, to board the airplane and travel to Canada. Without a valid TRV, then for temporary residents, it is almost impossible to travel to Canada unless they are in the United States and they are traveling by car and they can reach the border without a TRV. It doesn't mean they can enter Canada, but at least they can reach. So for traveling to Canada, we need a TRV if we don't have a valid permanent status in Canada. Obviously, some people, they can travel to Canada because they are visa exempt. They do not need a TRV. For example, US citizens do not need a TRV to travel to Canada. Or many countries, mostly Western European countries, the citizens of those countries, they only need an ETA or electronic travel authorization, which is a security clearance to be able to travel to Canada. They don't really need a TRV. So unless you are TRV exempt or you have permanent status in Canada, for traveling to Canada, you need a TRV. Also, when you are entering Canada, at the port of entry, a border services officer will use a TRV as a tool to understand whether to allow you to enter Canada or not. So the ability to travel to Canada and entering Canada are those two items on the list of TRV that define a TRV. The types of TRV are different, and you can find out about the TRV type by looking at the category code that appears on a TRV sticker or counterfoil. In this picture, you see V-1, which refers to a visitor. But if you want to see other codes, there are many codes, but these are some common codes. For example, B-1 is for business visitors. IM-1 is for somebody who has received approval for permanent resident, but they need to travel to Canada to become permanent residents. Or PC-1 is for somebody who holds a valid TRP and wants to travel to Canada. PG-1 is for super visa. S-1 for somebody who will receive a study permit at the port of entry or who already holds a study permit. SW-1 means somebody who is an international student with both a study permit or work permit. SX-1 means a student that is exempt from a study permit. V-1 refers to regular visitors. W-1 refers to work permit holders, and WX-1 refers to people who may work in Canada without a permit. Just to recap, visa is for traveling or entering Canada, and legal status occurs only when at the port of entry an officer allows you to remain in Canada, or somehow you obtain the permission to remain in Canada while you are inside Canada. And this is a huge distinction, because now you know that you receive a visa before traveling to Canada, and at the port of entry an officer allows you to remain in Canada. While you are in Canada, you may apply for an extension or change of your temporary status. Nevertheless, you must meet the requirements. An application for a TRV from inside Canada is also possible. So in other words, you may be inside Canada, but you don't have a valid TRV, yet you have legal status. However, if you want to leave Canada and come back, you need to apply for a temporary resident visa, assuming that you do not have permanent status and also you are not exempt from the requirements of visa. And if you are inside Canada, for example, with a work permit or study permit, you may apply for a TRV from inside Canada. But as I mentioned, TRV is for traveling to Canada, and legal status means you can remain in Canada. Thank you very much for watching this video and presentation. Please subscribe to our channel and follow us. Click that bell button so you can see our new videos. You may also visit settler.ca for more information. Especially, I have two specific articles that I used for this presentation. You can also locate them and read them. My name is Al Parsai. I'm a regulated Canadian immigration consultant. I have been a licensed practitioner since January 17, 2011. I'm currently a member of CICC. I am an adjunct professor at Queen's University and a faculty member and instructor at Ashton College. I am the manager of Parsai Immigration Services, which is located in downtown Toronto. We've had clients from 55 countries so far. I'm the author of 88 Tips on Immigration to Canada, which has been identified as a bestseller book by Amazon.ca several times under the immigration law. I have written more than 1,300 articles and posts about immigration to Canada. I hold a Master of Laws. I also hold a Master of Arts in Counseling Psychology, and I have taught many courses to other immigration consultants and other practitioners. Thank you, and see you soon.